The county trucks come up the frozen lane a little after 9, engines loud in the cold. And the men inside carry clipboards and a folded order with an official seal. They have come to close a dump. That is the word written on the paperwork tacked to the fence post, a pile of industrial waste 12 years deep. Sawdust dumped along the property line of a dying dairy farm in northern Wisconsin. The neighbor who filed the complaint is already grinning by his truck, waiting to watch it happen. And then the men walk the rows. They stop talking. One by one, without a word between them, they take off their hats. The order to clear the land in 30 days never gets served. Something on that farm made a county commission fall silent, and by the end of the morning, the man who came to shut her down was asking to sign a contract instead. How does a pile of garbage nobody would look at twice do that? To understand what those inspectors saw, you have to go back years to a woman with a green notebook, $40 a month, and a mountain of sawdust everyone told her to haul away. And the pile was still growing. Wood is almost pure carbon. A tree spends its whole life stacking that carbon into long, stubborn fibers, and when a saw blade turns a log into a mountain of dust, that carbon does not simply vanish. It sits there, waiting. Now picture a kitchen crew handed a warehouse full of flour and nothing else. No eggs, no water, no salt. They cannot cook a thing. The soil microbes that break down sawdust are that crew. They have all the carbon they could ever eat and almost none of the nitrogen they need to build their own bodies and get to work. So they go hunting. They pull nitrogen out of the surrounding dirt, the very nitrogen a tomato plant was counting on, and they lock it away inside themselves. Gardeners have a name for what happens next. Nitrogen starvation. The leaves go pale, the stalks go thin. The harvest quietly fails, and the sawdust looks innocent the whole time. The number that matters here is about 25 to 1. Roughly 25 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen is the balance those microbes want. Fresh sawdust runs closer to 400 to 1, far out of balance. Add something rich in nitrogen, say a few loads of manure, and the ratio swings back toward that quiet balance point. Then the pile changes. The crew has flour and eggs now. They multiply fast, feeding hard on the sawdust, and all that work throws off heat. A well-built pile of sawdust and manure will climb past 130 degrees in its core, hot enough to steam in cold air, hot enough to kill weed seeds and cook out disease. And there is one more trick the wood holds. Certain fungi, oyster mushrooms among them, refuse to fight the carbon at all. They eat it straight, threading pale white roots through the damp sawdust, like frost spreading across a cold window pane at dawn, one thin line at a time. Go back to a gray February in 2009, to a milking parlor on the Hallberg farm north of Mellon in Ashland County, Wisconsin, where the tank prices had dropped again and Arnie Hallberg was doing arithmetic that would not add up. To understand what his daughter would build on this land, you have to start on this exact morning. If you have ever kept something the whole world called junk, stay with this one, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The dairy was going under slow. 40 milk cows, a barn that leaned a little further each winter, a check that shrank every quarter. June was 18 that year, home from her first semester, watching her father count on his fingers at the kitchen table. A flatbed came up the lane near noon, the sawmill's name stenciled on the door. The man who climbed down was Curtis Lund, the mill's yard foreman. Boots caked in pale dust, breath white in the cold. "We're paying to haul our sawdust clear to the landfill in Ashland," Lund said, stamping his feet. "Costs us a fortune." You got the fence line in the room? Let us pile it out here. $40 a month, cash, and we do all the driving. Arnie looked at the empty acre along the road. $40 was 2 bags of feed. $40 was the phone bill. Sawdust just sits there, he said. Doesn't hurt anything. Doesn't hurt a thing, Lund agreed, and smiled. June watched from the porch, arms folded against the wind, saying nothing. Her father went inside for a pen, came back, and smoothed the single page flat against the truck's cold hood. He clicked it open, held the tip over the line where his name would go. The pen touched the paper. Frost silvered the fence wire the morning June Hauberg first saw the pile breathing. A little past 6, the 3rd week of December in 2021, and she had walked the lane in her father's old barn coat to feed the 4 cows that were left, the last of the 40 Arnie once milked. He had been gone 11 months, a heart that quit between 2 stalls, and she had driven up from Duluth to sell the farm and empty the house. Every morning she meant to call the realtor. Every morning she found a reason not to. Along the road stood the sawmill's leavings, pale dust heaped higher than the truck cabs that hauled it, a long gray ridge running the length of the property line. Curtis Lund's men still came the first Tuesday of every month, still left 2 folded $20 bills in the fence box, still called it a favor. The county used a colder word. On the tax map, the strip was marked a nuisance, and the neighbor down the road, Dale Brenner, had taken to calling it the Hallberg dump, loud enough to carry across the church lot. That morning the pile was steaming. Thin ribbons of vapor lifted off the crown of it into the dead, still air, the way breath rises off cattle in a cold barn. June stopped in the middle of the lane and stood, watching. Nothing else moved. She set the feed bucket down in the snow, crossed the ditch, and climbed the frozen crust of the heap on her hands and knees. Near the top, she worked her bare fingers down through a skin of frost. The dust gave way, soft and dark and damp, and under it something pressed back against her palm. Heat, rising up out of the middle of a garbage heap in the deep of a northern winter. She knelt there a long moment, hand buried to the wrist, then looked back toward the barn. The thermometer nailed beside the door read 9 degrees below 0. June's hands know the answer before her head does. She pushes them into the damp sawdust and closes a fistful. It should hold its shape, she tells herself, and give up maybe a drop or 2, no more. Moist to the touch, never dripping. That is the exact wetness an oyster mushroom wants in its bed of wood. Think of a kitchen sponge, wrung hard. Only a few drops fall, yet it stays damp, clear through to the middle. She opens her fingers, reads the little bead of water on her palm, and knows the batch is right. Push past that line, and the trouble begins. Here is why. The pale threads of the oyster fungus need air as much as they need water. They breathe through the tiny gaps between grains of sawdust. Pack that bed too wet, and water floods those gaps, drowns the little pockets of air, and the fungus starts to smother inside its own bed. A soggy, airless pile is also the favorite house of every other mold there is. Green fuzz, black spots, sour bacteria, the whole crowd that blooms in a damp basement corner. In cold, wet conditions, they run faster than the oyster and blanket the threads before a single mushroom can form. There is one more piece most beginners miss. Fresh sawdust is not clean. It carries its own sleeping load of spores and bacteria tucked in the wood, waiting for warmth and water to wake them. So growers heat the wet sawdust first, holding it near 160 degrees for an hour or 2. Not boiling, just hot enough, long enough to knock the rivals flat while the wood stays soft and open. Only then do you fold in the oyster spawn and let it run. Get the water off by a little, and the whole batch slumps into slime and gray fuzz inside a week. The real test was never whether dead wood can feed a living mushroom. Anyone can prove that. The quieter test is the one that breaks people. How do you keep every other hungry thing in the world from reaching your dinner first? By the second week of March in 2022, the buckets in the milk house had gone wrong. June Hallberg lifted the lid off the first one, and the smell reached her before her eyes did. Sour and green, a bloom of gray fuzz creeping across the sawdust where white threads should have been running. 6 buckets. Every last one, blotched and slick. She had soaked the wood too long, packed it too heavy, and the cold milk house finished the job. Weeks of tending, $40 of spawn. All of it collapsed into slime. She did not cry over it. She wrote the date in the green notebook, the water she had used, the temperature by the door, then drove into Mellon to the extension office to ask the one question she could not settle alone. The woman at the counter sent her east of town, to a farmhouse and a man named Emmett Sundberg, retired from the county 30 years, who had walked more failing fields in Ashland County than anyone still breathing. He met her on the porch in suspenders, a coffee can of stub pencils beside his chair. "Show me your numbers," he said. She handed the notebook over. He read it slow, page by page, and stopped at the soak times. "You drowned them," he told her, not unkind about it. "Air first, water after. Every grower learns that one the hard way, and only once." He never offered to fix it for her. He offered a trade instead. Her father's old brass grain scale, the one he had eyed at the county sale for years, for a summer of his time and his eyes. They shook on it, right there on the step. That evening, she carried the spoiled buckets past the fence and tipped them back onto the long gray ridge they had come from. The ruined fuzz caught the last of the light, green going to silver, and behind her a thin ribbon of steam lifted off the crown of the pile as she walked toward the barn without looking back. Saturday came bright and cool, the 9th of July in 2022, and the Ashland Farmers Market filled the lot behind the co-op by 7:30. June Hallberg backed her father's pickup to the far end, dropped the tailgate, and set out what she had. 2 flats of oyster mushrooms in clean gray clusters, 11 paper sacks of finished compost, dark and crumbly, smelling like the woods after a thaw. Emmett Sundberg had walked the rows with her since the thaw, and the wood that once starved her garden had turned, under manure and turning and patience, into something a plant could eat. She priced the mushrooms at $6 a pound, the compost at $4 a sack, wrote it small on a torn shingle of cardboard, and leaned it against the bumper. Then she stood back with her hands in her coat and waited. A woman stopped first, lifted a cluster to the light, and asked where the farm was. "North of Mellon," June told her, "past the mill." The woman took 2 pounds and came back trailing her sister. The cook from the diner carried off a whole flat for his Saturday plate. A retired teacher opened a sack, breathed it in, and bought 3 without a word about price. By 9, the flats were bare and the sacks were gone. June sat on the tailgate with the till box open and a soft fold of bills she had not counted. $60-some, more than Curtis Lund had left in her fence box across a whole year. A man in a pressed green shirt had been watching from 2 stalls down. He crossed the lot now, a card already turned between 2 fingers, Northwoods Garden Center printed under his name. He asked how many sacks she could make in a month. June did not answer right away. She looked down at the open box, at the little fold of bills, and for a long moment she said nothing at all. The mill changed hands in July, and the new manager drove out before the ink on the sale was dry. Wade Prentice kept the engine running while he talked. The hauling agreement was a handshake with a dead man, he said. The mill would not be paying $40 a month to dump an asset it could sell to a pellet plant in Superior. No more loads. And the pile that stood there, 12 years of it. That was her problem now. Dale Brenner came by the same week, leaned on the fence he had complained across for years, and made his offer. Land with a nuisance strip on the tax map, he said, was worth about what the cleanup would cost. He named a number so small she laughed before she could stop herself. He did not laugh back. "You'll take it by winter," he said, and drove off slow, the way a man drives when he believes the road is already his. The certified letter came the first week of October. Industrial waste accumulated without permit. 30 days to clear the property line, or the county would clear it for her and put the bill on her taxes. June read it twice at the kitchen table, where her father had once counted on his fingers, then set it under the green notebook and looked out at the long gray ridge that was slowly turning into soil. 30 days. The windrows needed 90. A compost heap builds its own furnace, and no one ever lights it. Pile the right things together in the right measure, and within days the middle turns hot to the touch, hot enough to steam in freezing air. The source is simple. It comes from the workers. Picture a barn on a January night, packed with cattle. No one strikes a match, yet the air inside hangs warm and close, thick with breath and the heat of bodies. Crowd enough living things into one space, feed them well, and they warm the room around them with no stove at all. A pile does the same, only its bodies are far too small to see. When the carbon in the wood is balanced against the nitrogen in the manure, when the moisture sits right and air still reaches the center, the bacteria wake and multiply at a furious pace. They burn through the soft sugars in the wood, and every mouthful throws off a little warmth. Multiply that by the countless millions feeding at once, and the heap climbs to 130, 150, even 160 degrees at the core. That heat earns its keep. It cooks weed seeds until they will never sprout. It kills the roots of disease and the eggs of pests. As the temperature rises, one crew of microbes hands the work to another crew that thrives in the heat, and the breakdown drives deeper. Here is the part that turns the whole picture over. The builders of that furnace are so small that a single teaspoon of the dark, finished stuff can hold more living creatures than there are people walking the entire face of the earth. The order in her coat pocket gave her 30 days. The commission gave itself one bright October morning to enforce it. 3 of them climbed out at the top of the lane, and the woman in front, Delia Frawley, chair of the Ashland County Board, held the complaint Dale Brenner had signed against the industrial dump north of Mellon. June Hallberg met them at the gate and said only, "Walk it with me before you sign anything." They walked. Along the fence where the gray ridge had loomed for 12 years ran long, dark windrows now, steaming faintly in the cold, turned and fed until the wood had gone to soil. Frawley crouched, pushed 2 fingers into the crown, and felt the heat still living at the center. Inside the old milking barn, where Arnie Hallberg's stanchions once stood, gray clusters of oyster mushrooms fanned out from stacked bags under a single bulb. Pinned to the post hung a signed order from Northwood's Garden Center. 40 sacks of finished compost a month straight through spring. Wade Prentice, the new mill manager who had torn up her father's hauling agreement in July, had driven out to watch the closing. He stood a long moment, saying nothing. Then he drew the pen from his shirt pocket and asked what she would charge to keep taking his sawdust off his hands. Frawley folded the complaint in half and slid it away. Dale Brenner waited at the fence where he had once offered pennies for the land. He took off his hat and held it against his chest and did not say a word. They had come to close her dump. They saw a farm. Here is the thing worth carrying home from a place like this. Trash is only material that no one bothered to look at long enough. The pile her father tolerated for a shameful $40 a month fed half a county once one quiet woman learned how to read it. Have you ever found worth in something the whole town called garbage? Tell us below and tell us where you are watching from. Subscribe and we will be back next week with another.